Anyway, I want to welcome everybody here. We excited about doing this event. We started it a few years ago with an idea to talk about who we were and how we got here. And Buck Bird and I did the first one about 2 years ago, and the lady who was sort of drove the organization moved away, and so we've been 2 or 3 years continuing. Tonight we're really fortunate to have Cindy Littlejohn, who's a doctorate in communication and is from an old Jefferson County family, and like a lot of us, kin to everybody. And she's written a book about these kinds of things. And this event, or these events, are sponsored by the Jefferson County Historical Association, and they're sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce and sponsored by the Ocello Research Institute. And our idea is to capture and preserve a lot of information, that's oral information that was handed down to all of us about our families, how we came to be in Jefferson County, and is it important? Well, I think it is, because it describes who we are, and it describes how we think we ought to behave. I've had some difficulties in my life, and I think the thing that saw me through that was, after all, Jack, this is not what your grandmother or your mother expected you to do. And the interesting part of this is these stories are as close to primary historical data as you can get. You get letters and other stuff, but the oral history that we pass down, sometimes in my case, I probably exaggerate the stories and I change them to make them better. But our effort will be to do this once a quarter for the next 5 years, and we will do 2 families a night. And we're going to record it, and we're lucky to have our videographer here, and he recorded Buck and I think too. He probably, and I don't know what you ought to do with that, but it's the beginning one. And so we want to carry this forward for 5 years. In 5 years, Monticello will be 200 years old. We'll have our bicentennial, and we'll have recorded the histories of families, white families, African American families, Jefferson County families, and we can archive that, and we will have 40 to 50 videos. And we were lucky to start off tonight with Cindy Littlejohn, and I'm going to turn it over. I can tell you a lot about Cindy. She's terrific, she's smart, and we're glad to have her, I'll tell you.
I don't think I have to tell you guys, I am nervous about this. And part of it is I read and write a lot better than I speak. So here we go. When I wrote Palmetto Pioneers, I just retired in 2014. And after a good 40 years of collecting information, I started in my mid-20s working on this family that goes so far back in this county. And at the time, we only thought they went back about 5 generations, and we found some more generations when I started doing the work. But I had all these boxes, and I thought, okay, I need to digitize this. I want other people to read it. So I put it all on Ancestry and some other places, and then I thought, nobody's going to read this stuff. Nobody cares who begat whom. I mean, it's boring. And so I started looking for a way to get the story of this family out. And I discovered a genre of writing through a professor from Canada who teaches you how to write your family history. And I took some courses under her and very quickly realized how I wanted to write this story. And so I chose one family member to write it. And she is my third great-grandmother. Her name is Mary Adeline Walker. And she came to this county as a 7-year-old child with her family. And that's what I boiled it down to. And when I wrote the book, I had a writing schedule at first, and poor Chuck, we were both retired, so he was listening to a lot of this ad nauseum. But I was working mostly 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon. And then family matters happened, and I had to break it down to just 3 hours a day and 4 days a week, because I've always spent one day working in the genealogy library, which is a great place to research anybody that lived in this county. And so I finally got this book, and I looked for an editor, a local person that could help, that knows the local families, etc. And that is Dr. Jim Sledge, who I know a lot of you know. And Dr. Sledge became my reader. Actually, we kind of fell into that pattern because he stopped me on the streets one day, and Dr. Sledge now I think is 95, somewhere along there. And he said, "Cindy, if you don't finish this book, I'm going to die," you know. So I said, okay, I'll start sending you chapters. So he got the very first draft, and it was rough, but he wanted to read it, and he has actually read the whole thing. And that he's the one that said, "Cindy, this is not one book. This is more than one book." And now it is 3 books, and this one is the first of the 3. All 3 of them are written. Only the second one has been edited through the local editor, which is Dee Counts, who everyone knows a lot about this county, and she's a very good one to catch problems in that era. And then that one is probably about a year away, and I think it'll probably be next fall before it comes out. And then the third one, to give you an idea, the first one stops when Florida becomes a state. We are a territory up until that point. It stops at statehood. The second one stops about 2 years into the Civil War, and then the third one stops just about 1871. We're still in Reconstruction, but we're getting toward the end of it. And that's how the story runs. So it took 6 years to write, 1 entire year. During that time, new research kept popping out. And something prime to the book was 120 copies of the Monticello News came out, was digitized from 1859 to 1861. It literally changed the story. I found something in there that changed the story, and it didn't change the ending, but it changed one whole chapter in the story. So it was interesting. That's the part of the book I like the best, is research. It's what I enjoy doing. It's like finding diamonds in the straw, you know, the little information. But as a writer, I had to realize I had to cut that off. I had to stop researching and write. And that was one of the hard parts for me. I self-published the book on Amazon. I decided to go that way because I'm writing about a time period in the 1800s, and I didn't want all the political stuff that's going on today to affect the story itself. And so I tried to keep that out. And the publishing world is full of people that will try to take you that direction, and I didn't want to go there. I wanted this to be their story, the people that actually lived here. And I didn't even want my voice in it. Whatever, I'm thinking, I tried to keep that out as well. But I did self-publish on Amazon. It was amazingly easy, a lot easier than I anticipated. I don't like how much money they get, but that's, they have a huge world that I can reach out to, so it was worth doing. Anyone can self-publish a book. I need to talk about two influences in my early life that helped me to get to do what I did. One was my high school, Jefferson County High School here in Monticello. We had wonderful educators, and one in particular, Betty Messer, was my English teacher. She was really good. She taught English composition and taught it well. She was on me like white on rice. If you know the Roe family, we have a terrible time with our spoken grammar. I mean, it's our past tenses. We get them all mixed up. And my grandson is talking. He must say, oh, yeah, they do. But Betty Messer, it didn't matter if I was in the classroom in front of kids, by myself with her, it didn't matter. She stopped me and corrected me right then. And looking back, I realized what a lesson that was. She taught me correct grammar. She taught me how to write mostly. When in the state of Florida, if you graduated in the 60s, you took something called the Florida Board Exam. And the Florida Board Exam was like the SAT was later. And every kid that wanted to go to a Florida college had to take it. And each part of it, you got 99 points. Well, I got all 99 of the English on that. And I think it was Betty Messer. I think she gave that to me. The reason I know she taught me to write is because of that score. I didn't have to take the English classes in the first 2 years. She was the one who taught me how to do that. But the real basis goes to my father's mother, my grandmother Roe. She spent time on her porch, her sleeping porch, with the blackboard teaching me my ABCs before I even got to kindergarten. She gave me a lifelong passion for learning. And so those two people are strong influences in my life. Mary Adeline Walker really got under my skin to the point that I was so absorbed in trying to figure out how she thought about things and felt about things that I started dreaming about her. And speaking of dreams, in the first book, I was looking for a way to describe a young girl's fear during the Indian uprisings. And this county did have some significant uprisings. And I remembered a dream that I had that I still was having till about 20 years ago. I would dream that I woke up, I was under my bed, and Indians were in my home. And I couldn't find Mom and Dad, I couldn't find Pam, I couldn't find anybody else in the family, and it was very frightening. I think it probably came about because we never missed a John Wayne movie, as long as I remember. But I used that story, that became how she shows her fear in that time. She has the dreams too. Someone asked, well, what did you edit out of the book? A lot of superfluous language. Oh my gosh, I had no idea how much I overwrite until I really worked on it. Sometimes it actually 4 or 5 chapters over 1,000 words. I did take some things out that I think were not that interesting, but really it was all the extra words that I used. As far as the ethics of writing about these characters, I tried very hard to make sure I checked and double-checked all of my facts. because I felt I owed it to them. The most challenging part of this story were the Indian Wars. When I set the organizational plan for the book, I had decided one chapter for the Indian Wars. I had no idea how much happened in Jefferson County until I started doing the research. The guerrilla warfare that the Indians used, and used it very well, a lot of it was done right here in this county. And one of the massacres was just down the street from Mary's home. And so I know they could hear it. There was another one in the neighborhood at Sandy Ford. That's where the US 90 crosses the Osceola River. There was another massacre there. We actually went down there and shot a gun to see if you could hear it at their house, and you couldn't. So I don't know if it was the wind that day or what, but we decided that one they couldn't hear, but the one that happened down right next to their land, they could hear. One reason that was happening was downstate, where the seat of the war was. Every time it got too hot, the Seminole Indians were very clever. They would start hitting up here. They were trying to divide. And so they were fighting a very good war. And by the way, in interviewing them, they do not believe that this was 3 separate wars. You know, we call it First Seminole War, Second Seminole War, Third Seminole War. Those wars lasted about a 30-year period. They consider it one 30-year war because they never gave up. And that's why we call them unconquered. They never gave up. The other part of this presentation is the part that's going to be like the rest of the families of who we were in this county. And who we were, we're looking for these families that had moved here by 1830. I thought my Hamricks would be in that group, but they're not. They got here too late. The families in this book that are part of this presentation are the Walkers, Andrews, Carters, Middletons, Wilsons, Lightseys, Howells, Patchocks, and Kinseys. And the primary family in the book are the Walkers. The Walkers, we know they came here in 1829. And the way we figured that out is we took census records. We could see in the 1820, 30, and 40s where that family unit was, but we couldn't see who those children were. And so in 1850, we could actually see a list of children. The trouble is, Mary is not listed. She has already married. She moved out in 1843 to live with her husband, who was an Andrews. So that's how we determined we could see the children and where they were born, and that's how we could determine when they made the move, because this child, the first 3, say, were born in South Carolina, and then all the rest of them were born right here in Jefferson County. And so that's how you could tell when a family got to an area. They came from mostly Colleton District, South Carolina. That is an area that is western and kind of southern from Charleston. It's in the Low Country. The Walkers and the Carters came from Colleton. The Middletons came from Charleston District. The Wilsons came from Colleton. The Lightseys actually came from next door in Barnwell County. And by the way, we know more about the Lightseys. They came from a village in Germany in the Baden-Baden region of the Black Forest. The Kinseys and the Pagets came from Colleton. The Howells came from Barnwell. The Andrews came from Georgetown in the District of Columbia. So we've got someone very different marrying Mary Adeline Walker. He came from really Washington, D.C., and there's a whole story there too. And with him came his brother-in-law, and so most of the Goffs in this area come from that family from Virginia. We know that the family in Colleton County, what they did before they came south, they mostly were livestock traders. They had cattle and they had pork, and there is some evidence of cotton in the family as well. The one that came from Washington, D.C., his father was a joiner of woodwork. And this man the son was actually born when they were rebuilding Washington, D.C. after the fires during the War of 1812, which actually happened in 1814. The mode of transportation that they used, the ones from Colleton County came down by wagons, horseback, and on foot. We're fairly certain that they brought a foundation herd of cattle with them, because that's what families that were already in livestock did there when they came down. We think that they took the Fort Moore Charleston Road that ran between Charleston and Augusta, Georgia, and then they got on the Fall Line Road, which really is the major interstate highway of the Southeast that came all the way down from Philadelphia, all the way through. It kind of came in an arc, all the way through the Carolinas, Georgia, and on into Mississippi. This is how people got through this area. And then once they got to Milledgeville, we think they came south on the Blackshear Trail. And the reason for that is because the cattle had to have water regularly. And if they came the Coffee Trail, there were areas with no water. And it would have been very hard to bring the cattle through that area. The Blackshear Trail ended just north east of Albany, Georgia, at Fort Early. And then they came on down, and in the book, there's some smaller roads that you'll just have to read the book about. The part of this county that they came to when they got here is the Elizabeth community. Does everybody here know where the Elizabeth community is? It is out east of town before you get to the Osceola River. If you cross the Osceola River on US 90, it's all that land north of US 90 in that area. The main road that came through there, the historical road, is called the Old Salt Road. And the Old Salt Road is where the people from Georgia went all the way down to the coast to get their salt. And so this is the area that these families moved into. It's way north of Osceola is where it is. I talked about some of the related families, and I'll give you a little more detail here. It might be more than some of you won't, but there are family members here that would know that. Through the marriages, Mary's grandmother was a Carter, and her great-grandmother was a Carter too. So it seems that Mary's grandparents were cousins before they married. The Carters and the Middletons both came. There's one Carter. There are two Carter families that came to Jefferson County, and one Middleton family. One of the Carter families was massacred and killed. He was killed, although some of his family ran off in the woods and were saved. That happened down near where Ted Turner's plantation is. That's where they lived, down in that part of the county. The Howells married into the family. Mary's Uncle Joel married a Howell, and Linda DeMott over here is an offspring of that family. And then Mary's son-in-law's mother was a Howell also. So I have Howells in my family as well. The Howells Mary's daughter married a Lightsey, and I'm part of that family. And then her aunt also married a Lightsey. So there were two large Lightsey families brothers that came down here as well. Mary married an Andrews, but it appears he is the only Andrews from his family that moved to Florida. And he did not come through Georgia. He came directly from Washington, D.C., and I'm fairly certain they came by ship, probably to the port in St. Mark's. Mary's Uncle James married a Paget, and her Uncle Littleberry married a Kinsey once he got to this county. Mary's mother was a Wilson, and there was another Jefferson County woman who married a Parker, and she was also a Wilson, and it appears that she is Mary's mother's sister. And they live just down the road from the Walkers. So that's some of the families that are in the book and how they connect with each other. I was asked, are there any famous or historical family members in these families? And the short answer is, I don't think they're famous, okay? Nobody would know them unless they read this book, and who knows who's going to read the book. But we do know that Mary's father represented Jefferson County to the State Democratic Convention in the 1850s, and he was also one of the founders of Elizabeth Baptist Church, along with his brother James and possibly a cousin, Charles Walker. Mary's husband, William, became a sheriff of Jefferson County in 1855, and Linda's ancestor, Joel Walker, was also a sheriff just before William Andrews was a sheriff in the county. You'll notice those sheriffs only kept the job about 2 years. Well, I've learned nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted that job. It was horrible. There was no pay, and they just really didn't want to do it. But someone had to do it. He also, after he was sheriff, he was also this county's first depot agent when the railroad came through. And he also served as sergeant of arms in the House of Representatives when Florida seceded from the nation. He was also, back then, their officers in their militias and armies, they were actually elected. They weren't appointed. And he was elected a lieutenant during the Indian Wars and a sergeant during the Civil War. Some of the families that are offspring of these families now that are in this county, the Hartsvilles, the Bishops, the Hamricks, the Andrews in Madison County, the Sledges, the Gramlings, Lewis, Hampton, Carroll, Clark, Arndt, Braddock, Bell, Waters, McLeod, Slaughter, Clayton, Johnson, Morris. And guys, I quit looking after a while because I just got so tired of going through. There's so many families that are offspring from these people that I just mentioned. So there is a family tree with about 12 or 14,000 names in it. It's not in the book. It's online through Ancestry, and the book tells you how to find it. And you can put a name in the search engine, and it'll tell you if that name is in that tree or not. And so you can go there and maybe look up the family if you're looking for a family member. They asked me, do I have any stories about that grandparents told me about their grandparents? The only one that just jumped out at me actually came through the Hamrick family, and that is my grandfather Hamrick said that his grandfather, who fought in the Civil War, told him that he had been wounded badly at Gettysburg, and he was sent home to recuperate. And he was able to recuperate after several months, and when he went to the depot in Osceola to go back to the war, they told him that they had just found out the war was over, and he never had to go back. So that's the only story I can remember. But the Hamricks, that story is not in this book. And the Hamricks aren't a part of this book because you have to realize the Walkers were here 20 years before the Hamricks got here, even though they all got here before the Civil War. The Hamrick story is going to be a story much later because there are things that happened to them in the 1890s to the 1920s that was a better story than this one was. They also asked me if we still have family living on historical property, historically family property. And the answer really is no. About 5 years ago, the Lightseys, the last of the Lightsey family, sold their property. They had owned the land since the 1830s. And my cousin, Mary Hartsfield Brown Lightsey, when she passed away, her husband was her second husband, and his children is who inherited the property. Well, the two children are elderly now, and they live down in Brevard County in that area, and it's too far to keep up with it and everything, and so they sold it about 5 years ago. As far as I know, that's the last. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's not sold.
Huh? It's
They
not.
still own it.
Oh, they still own it? Oh, I thought they sold it already. Someone told me they did. Well, it's not sold yet. So yes, we do have. I'm glad I talked to you. We do have some historical land still in the family, but it's not in my family. So, and that. Let's see. Oh, and they wanted to know if we had any historic pictures. We have photos of William and Mary's children. And in Valentine's case, one of the middle sons, we have a photo that I'm almost positive was taken right here in the school or near the school. He looks like he's dressed up for school, and he's very young in the photo. Most of the photos, though, they're elderly. The men are, and there is one of my great-great-grandmother who was Mary and William's youngest daughter, Laura Andrews Lightsey. There's a picture of her, and she looks like she's about 30, 35 years old. And the first time I saw that photograph, I had to take a second look. She reminded me of my mother, especially her mouth and part of her eyes. Also, we have no structures from that family, but we do have one Hamrick picture of the house that William A. Hamrick, who I told you the story about the Civil War coming back from the war. We have a picture of his house. It was made out of planks, but they lost that in the 1920s in a woods fire, so that house is no longer there. But it sat on Grambling Road down in the Elizabeth area. So that's it. That's basically everything I have. I can take some questions if anybody has questions, or we'll get on to the book signing. So, any questions?
I got one.
Sure, go ahead.
Andrew, they live in Greenville?
No. Well, oh yeah, you're talking about, yes, the ones in Madison County, yes. But, okay. Yeah, do you know Valinda Williams, Fred Williams' wife? She was an Andrews. She's one of James Jefferson Andrews' offspring from this story. So, yeah, and there was also Zachary Andrews. All of his family settled down in there, and they're in that area as well. So, yeah, that's... But I thought what you were going to ask, I cannot find a connection. I can find a connection between all the Walkers. I don't care if they came in this county in 1820 or came in this county in 1890. They all go back to this same group of Walkers in Colleton County, South Carolina. And to prove it, we did the DNA. We got DNA, Y DNA, not the kind that you read about all the time, but the Y DNA, it goes through the father's father's fathers. In other words, it's following the surname all the way back. That's the DNA that we used. We got some from Roger Walker. We got some from Steve Walker, who's closer kin to me. And then a third group, I don't know if you guys that went to high school here knew Marilyn Walker. Marilyn is the third Walker family. They came down in the 1850s. We got some from her first cousin, who is a Presbyterian minister up in Georgia. Now he's in North Carolina somewhere. We got it from all three. They are all kin. They go back to the same Walkers in Colleton County. And so that's in the book too. There's an entire there's an appendices that talks about those three families and how they're connected. I could find the connection between all our Walkers in this county, but I never could find the connection between all our Andrews. And most of my Andrews are gone. They're people like me with another last name. There's some over in Madison County that still have the Andrews name. But we tend to have a lot of girls in this family, so we lost them. Yeah, David?
Cindy, can you explain to everybody the location of Elizabeth Church and where it is now and where it probably was?
Okay. The Elizabeth Church now sits on Bassett's Dairy Road. And we've known, I heard it my whole life, that was not the original place where the church was. But nobody could tell you where the church was. When I was doing the research, the obituary, remember I told you that one of the newspaper articles changed the story? It changed the story because I didn't know exactly what happened to Mary's mother. Her obituary was in an 1859 issue of what then the Monticello News was called The Family Friend. That's where I found it. In that obituary, we know where she's buried. That obituary, we didn't need that obituary to tell us where she was buried. Family members all told us she was buried in what we call Walker One Cemetery. Walker One Cemetery sits on Walker Cemetery Road, just off of Old Salt Road in the Elizabeth community. We know she's buried there. In that obituary, which none of us had seen until this got digitized, and it's at the University of Florida, by the way, it says that we could tell by the obituary it was a long illness. It was not a short illness. And that she had time to go out and pick out her place in the churchyard cemetery. So if we know where she's buried, that church had to be there. It had to be next to that cemetery. And so now Elizabeth Baptist, who just celebrated their 191st homecoming, they just put a marker there that is where Elizabeth Baptist Church began. And by the way, in the book that was written by the WPA in the 1930s, it mentions that church, that people called it Walker Church. Well, that's where the Walker family settled, and that's probably where they started. And that's how Jesse and James and Charles were part of the founding of that church. Does that answer it?
Cindy, are they part of the same Walker that are in the south part of the county?
Yes. All three of them are connected. Let me tell you about the Walkers in the south part. This is very, very interesting. They may be the Walkers that got here first, because I can find documents with them in it before I can find our documents. And what they did is they settled just over the line in Thomas County, Georgia. It's Brooks County now. That's where they settled. They were literally about 8 miles up the road from my family. They could have come together, but there's definitely 2 documents before 1829 that tells me they could have been here before anybody. So they were just up the road the whole time, and then over the years they migrated from that area below Quitman down to Madison County. I can see evidence where they were in Madison County. then Taylor County. They may have been in the same place because Taylor County was carved out of Madison County. And then they finally moved on into this county in 1890. So they were here the whole time. They were just up there across the Georgia line. And remember, that Georgia line was called no man's land because Georgia said it was theirs and we said it was ours. There was a fight over that land, and that's where they went and they fought their duels and things like that because it was against the law down here, but they could go up there and do things that they couldn't do down here. So they may have been in Florida the whole time. Yes?
Is the Roe family a descendant of this storyline?
Say it again?
Is the Roe family a descendant of this storyline?
The Roe family did not get here till 1920. That's my maiden name, and this is my grandson asking me the question. The Roe family got here in 1920, and my father married my mother, who was John L. Hamrick. That's, I keep mentioning Hamricks, that's because that was a big part of my family. Any more questions? Thank you. Thank you.